Well, President Trump right now on his way to Tokyo, which will be the first international stop of his Asian trip. That will include stops in Seoul, Beijing, Vietnam, and the Philippines. You know, on his first stop when he lands in Tokyo, he will be scheduled to meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe tomorrow. On the agenda between the two, of course, trade between our two countries and the continuing and looming threat from North Korea. As you know, they've launched several missiles over Japanese territory and threaten us. Here's National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster.
President Trump will reiterate the plain fact that North Korea threatens not just our allies South Korea and Japan and the United States. North Korea is a threat to the entire world, so all nations of the world must do more to counter that threat.
Harry Katsianis joins us. He's Director of Defense Studies at the Center for the National Interest. Harry, good to see you. Do you think our allies, and more specifically Beijing, will get that very message?
Eric, I think they're absolutely going to get this message. And to be frank with you, I think this is actually the most important presidential visit that President Trump might ever actually go on. And the reasons are quite clear. What the president needs to do in going out to Asia is essentially reassure all of our critical allies when it comes to the North Korean threat. And this is a threat, to be honest with you, people like myself and other experts did not see coming. I always thought North Korea was probably 2 to 3 years away from developing intercontinental ballistic missiles that could hit the United States. But we have to keep in mind, our Asian allies in Japan and Seoul, they've been dealing with this threat for years now, and we're just getting hit with it head on. So I think the president has a tall task ahead of him, but I think it's something that he could accomplish.
Yeah, and there's even a one projection that we could have nuclear-tipped North Korean missiles able to hit America completely by next year.
Eric, I'm going to be honest, I think they can actually do it right now. They have all of the technological pieces that they need to do it. They have long-range missiles. They, according to the Washington Post this summer, they were able to miniaturize warheads and put them on those missiles. People at the Pentagon have told me that they have the tracking and telemetry they need to do it. It's just a question if they have the heat shield technology for those missiles to go through the atmosphere and hit the target. There's been reports actually a few months ago that they had that crude capability. So I'd actually say we're out of time. Now it's just a question of containing North Korea.
Well, if you're out of time, well, how do you contain North Korea? It hasn't worked. The negotiations haven't worked. Taking them off the terror list hasn't worked. Dealing with oil for food like the Clinton administration did, that apparently didn't work. So what do we do?
Simple. The North Korean economy is a tiny economy. It's only worth $14 billion. It's actually only 1/3 the size of Ethiopia. So if we can get together an international coalition that will strangulate that economy, something much more challenging and more robust than Obama or Clinton or anybody else has tried, which I think actually is what the Trump administration is trying to do right now, we can do it. I mean, just an example, if we actually stop the North Koreans from exporting slave labor to all sorts of different countries, that's actually worth $2 billion of that $14 billion pie.
Yeah, but you've got these countries in Africa that build monuments and statues, you know, using this type of North Korean money that's being kicked back to Kim Jong Un.
Right, and that's why we have to stop it. I mean, the Trump administration has been going wild trying to do this. They've been going through the Middle East. They've been going through Europe. There's definitely pressure that we can put on Russia and China to do this, or we have to internationally shame them. There's no excuse for that type of behavior.
You talk about pressure on China. Okay, they've cut off some of the banks. They cut off some of the North Korean companies. But, I mean, they haven't cut off all the coal. They haven't cut off the electricity. I mean, they can shut down Kim Jong Un's lights and his TV set tonight if they want to do that. And there's no indication that President Xi is going to take those type of measures to get the strong message across.
Well, Eric, this is one of those times where the United States needs to exert the power and leverage it has over China. I mean, let's face it, the United States and China have tons of pressure points in the South China Sea, over Taiwan, in the East China Sea. And we've been playing nice with them on those pressure points for a long time. I think if the Chinese are not willing to help us on this shared threat, I think the United States is really going to have to exert pressure in those other areas.
You talk about that. Let me read you what the Wall Street Journal says today in the editorial today, exactly on that point. They say, quote, the best reassurance for Asian democracies that Mr. Trump can give next week will be proof he understands that Xi Jinping's long-term goal is to push the U.S. out of Asia, and that the Obama years encouraged Mr. Xi to pursue that goal more aggressively. The first test of Mr. Trump's new Asia strategy will be to convince China that its support for North Korea is backfiring. At what point do we get to that point where they say, you know, maybe we are being hurt by this now?
I think the Chinese are already there, but to be very honest with you, Eric, they are very scared to push a lot harder than what they are, because the factor of the matter is if North Korea were to collapse, if the Chinese were to push it to the obvious, toughest place they could, they would be facing millions of refugees. Who knows, a North Korean civil war where different factions are vying for power and shooting nuclear weapons at each other. So the Chinese have a difficult balancing act, but they know that they can press a little bit harder, and really the ultimate goal for us and Beijing is to get Pyongyang to the table and figure out some negotiated settlement out of this crisis.
So when you finally, when you say negotiated settlement, I mean, what do you predict? He's going to meet Vladimir Putin potentially on the sidelines in Vietnam. How do you think this will play out in the coming months?
I think the first step is some sort of talk about talks, to be honest with you. Open negotiations, trying to get to know one another and maybe build some rapport. I think in the short term, though, I do see the North Koreans testing more nuclear weapons, testing more missiles. They're not going to probably want to talk to us until they feel that they have the ability to hit us. So the next couple of months, I think, are going to be very dicey.
Yeah, they've been letting their missile launches doing the talking for now. Harry Kazianis, good to see you.
Thanks,
thank you for your analysis, and we'll see how the president's trip plays out.
Absolutely.
Thank you.